Hi, everybody. I'll give you a moment to connect to sound. Hello. Hello, and welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 1127th New Social Environment. I'm Chloe Stagaman, Director of Programs at the Rail, and I have the privilege of being your MC today for a conversation featuring Viktor Hübner and Lyle Rexer. And now I'll introduce today's guest and host. Viktor Hübner is a photographer and writer whose work delves into themes of community, ideology, and socio-political tensions. Born to Russian-German repatriates from the former Soviet Union, Hübner's own experience of identity and displacement shapes his storytelling. Through photography, audio, and text, he captures insights into the practical and spiritual lives of people navigating complex cultural landscapes. And our host today, independent critic, curator, and writer Lyle Rexer, is the author of The Critical Eye, 15 Pictures to Understand Photography, The Edge of Vision, The Rise of Abstraction in Photography, and Photography's Antiquarian Avant-Garde, The New Wave in Old Processes, and others. He's published hundreds of catalog essays and articles on art, architecture, and photography, and contributed to the New York Times, Harper's, Art in America, and of course, the Brooklyn Rail. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Lyle to get us started.
Thanks, Chloe. I want to thank the Rail, as always. I think I've done maybe 10 NSEs, I think something like that. And every time I do this, I'm always really both impressed and inspired by what the Rails managed to do in terms of the digital programming, especially the NSE. I just think it's an incredible resource. And over time, people are beginning to realize just how important an archive it is, and also an experience that we can have online, when we have live human beings like now. So I want to thank, obviously, Fong and Chloe and Magali as well, everybody who works on the Rail team. You guys are amazing, and I love working with you. You're just great. I wanted to give just a little bit of background about the project from my perspective and my encounters with Viktor. And this is not going to be, it can be, but it's not going to be a postmortem on the election. However, I do think that, and I think the reason why there was so much interest in having Viktor on to do this is that I think you'll see very clearly that Viktor has a lot of insight about just exactly how this country is sort of not simply divided, but kind of how it's thinking and also how it's living. So I think this is enormously relevant, important, and timely. Okay, that said, so I first met Viktor at RISD, which is where he was a graduate student. And this would have been, Viktor, remind me, but this was like 2019, maybe?
That's
it was your, yeah, 2019. And it was for the students graduating from the MFA program, it was their exhibition. And I was immediately drawn to the work that Viktor had displayed for two reasons. One, because it was about this place called America, and two, because the work was enormously accomplished already by 2019. Viktor had been on the road. He'd done a lot of traveling, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But the pictures that had come out of it were obviously already carefully edited. They already had a kind of specific gravity, and they were also very ambitious. All these things I recognized from looking at pictures, especially about America in the 1970s, which is one of the most important periods for American photography by far. And one of the preoccupations of many of those photographers was America, no matter where they came from, no matter who they were. And it felt to me like Viktor had taken up a tradition that was really important, and I was drawn to that. I got in touch with him. We talked a lot about where the project was going, and eventually it became the book called, it's called The Americans I Met. And I wrote an essay for that, and it's been a very important project for me ever since Viktor and I met. That said, I want to take this opportunity to ask Viktor about the project, and I have a lot of questions for him these have been kind of bubbling in my mind for quite a while. And we put up the map. The first thing we put up is the map. And this describes the travels that Viktor took in order to make the pictures that many of which you'll see today. So let's talk, Viktor, a little bit about the genesis of the project. Where did it come from? And what was the scope and extent of it? How did it kind of like take shape?
Thank you very much, Lyle, for this great introduction. I vividly remember our first encounter at RISD and our first conversation about it. You already had, I believe, 10, 20 questions when we first encountered. So I'm used to that. Yes, so it's 2017. Trump has entered office not too long ago. I moved to the US the first time to RISD, started my MFA program in 2017, and I was living in Providence, Rhode Island. And I found it, first of all, coming from a foreign country, have never been here, but having been exposed to American culture since I can remember, basically, I carried basically in me a dream of once touching the soil here, once being here, once discovering this country. I think most Europeans, maybe even probably people outside of Europe as well, have a similar fantasy idea about this country. And so I was fascinated by this country, simply speaking. On top of that, again, 2016, 17, we had a huge amount of national and international media coverage about the election.
Right.
And I was fascinated by that. Now I'm living in Rhode Island, in Providence, first time, and I figure out people around me at school, in my private environments, keep referring to this presidency if I can boil it down to one single sentence, it would be, and probably it's the same one today, it is, we are living in controversial times. And that sentence, and I kept hearing it in combination with the media coverage and looking at the same photographers you just mentioned, obviously, most obviously it would be Robert Frank, the Americans, and a couple of others. Looking at these people's work, at these artists' work, made me very slowly, it was not I didn't come with that idea to that country, but made me very slowly realize there is an opportunity to record this moment of time. And I have not just the artistic, but also the social skills to make that happen. Especially the second one is important for a project like that. And when I first proposed it, I will never forget that. When I first proposed my ideas, and this was a rough sketch, not by far not what we see now, the outcome. First proposed it at RISD, and people in my private environment, they called me insane.
Well, like specify a little bit more about the rules of the project, because I think if people see those rules now, they'll also think you're insane. Okay.
Okay, so I have to say, I didn't come up straight away with those rules. Those rules developed in the early stage. 5 main rules, just to quickly go through them. Be open to conversation with everyone I meet. No public transportation to maximize opportunities for encounters. And no money unless for food and film, shot on a medium format camera. And no hotels or motels. And no online arrangements. So when I didn't come up with it straight away, it developed throughout this process. And basically it limited me to walking and hitchhiking and every single night knocking on strangers' doors across this country. And when I first proposed that.
Not to interrupt, but as I was doing a little historical research on this, I did find that in the 1970s, there was a photographer, I believe maybe from Denmark. I can't remember, Denmark, Sweden, from Scandinavian.
It's Denmark, yes.
Yeah. And who had a similar idea came up with a very different set of pictures, but was really kind of plugged into this idea that the way to do this was to hitchhike. Of course, times have changed a lot, and that idea of hitchhiking, which used to be in the 70s really common, not anymore. So is that why people thought you were crazy?
Yes. When I first of all, not everyone even knows. I learned that not everyone knows what the word means, especially the younger generation. We had to explain to them what the definition of hitchhiking is. So for those of you who don't know it, you stand on the side of the street or the road and you put up your thumb, and whoever stops, you jump inside the car and you go with that person. Or you stand at a gas station and you speak to strangers, trying to convince strangers to get into the car and go with them, be it 1 mile or 100 miles. So it really depends on that person. And yes, so I was literally told from my colleagues and professors, they tried to convince me not to do it. They said, it's like, there's no way you cannot come home. You're going to get shot, stabbed, murdered, robbed, but you will not come home when knocking on strangers' doors in this country. And I started to hitchhike locally in New England to get a feeling for it. And I have to add now, for those who don't know my background, I do have an extensive hitchhiking experience in Europe and a bit in the Middle East. So I did that in other countries for quite extensive amount of time. And that, in looking at Jacob Holt's work, he is Danish, I realized, well, I have that experience, and he's absolutely right. That's the easiest way into people's hearts, houses, and cars.
Yeah, and
this is a fun fact. I met him.
Point out what you can't see from the Zoom screen, because we can't see Victor standing up in the room. How tall are you, Victor?
So I'm 6'11" or 209 centimeters.
Yeah.
Yes.
So did that make a difference to people being either afraid to pick you up, or do you think that changed dramatically your relationship to the people who were actually out there enough to be willing to pick you up? I'm very curious about that.
Well, I would say it changes my everyday life, not just on the road. I'm in Paris right now for Paris Photo, and I'm walking here. People are coming up to me, French people, international people, to chat with me about my height, and that's an easy door opener. Obviously, on the roads, it's not just my height. So it's my height. On top, I had a big German Deuter hiking backpack on, so I didn't see anyone in the country walking with a backpack like that. And it definitely changed the perception of me. Plus my foreign accent. So many people in the public space approached me in the US because they were way too curious to let that chance pass by of knowing who am I.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, I want to get to the pictures, but there's a bunch of other questions that I think we are worth putting on the table or sorting out. The first one had to do with that. Did you have an idea that you were going to crisscross the country, or was it, I will like head west, for example, from Providence, or head south or north or wherever? Or did you simply pick an initial, let's say, direction and then see what happened?
So maybe we can go back one slide and take another look at the map. Yes, thank you. So originally, I have these 3 numbers, 1, 2, 3. This is the 3 different routes. I made some initial hitchhiking just in New England, and then when I figured that works against what I was told, I then came up with the idea. Okay, I have now, I believe, 2 months. How far can I go in 2 months? And I figured, well, let's try to get to Miami. I need to see if that's possible. And so this was my first route. I went all the way down to Miami and circled back again to New England. And after that, I realized, okay, it is totally possible for me. Now I need to think larger, in a bigger picture. And I would like to cover more land. And this was mostly also driven by hearing Americans around me talking about how different the US is depending where you are. East Coast, West Coast, the Midwest, the South, and I understood, okay, to do something like this, I have to cover more ground. And then I came up to the
idea. You really wanted to get the scope, is what I'm.
Yes.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
On top of it, just to mention, it's also quite important. I did start to make research from that point on in what sections or what pockets of the country do I find certain demographics, and can I steer my way through it? For instance, just to give, for example, where are the Amish?
Right.
Where is the highest concentration of Amish people? And is it possible for me to steer my hitchhiking through that area and actually meet some of them?
Right. So this was a little bit more strategic, and there was a kind of evolution of the organization, which I'm really very interested in. That's going to get to another set of questions a little later on that I want to ask you about. Precisely those differences that you may have found. But before we do that, I want to go look just at a couple of pictures that takes us back to those great, road photographers that we referenced in the beginning. And and we can start almost anywhere. This is a really good one. And there's a couple of others that will come up. This one in particular jumped out at me because it feels almost exactly visually organized the way Stephen Shore organized that really famous picture he shot on the Merced River of the people by the empty river, just kind of hanging around. And I wondered if there was a lot of deliberate referencing going on when you saw these scenes, or because there's a couple of other ones I wanted to get to.
There are a couple of don't think it's on the slideshow now, but another one, it's definitely one in San Francisco at the park, which is direct reference to Robert Frank. I would like to say I didn't shoot with that perception or that idea. However, by studying, going through undergrad and grad school, strong focus on photography, I have for sure seen these images, and I have saved them somewhere in my unconsciousness. So there is,
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
So it's hard to tell. It's not. I didn't stand there thinking about him in his image at that moment, but I was definitely influenced by his work.
Right. So I want to just look at two more quickly that kind of fit into this. Zoe, if you can find who's doing the pictures? Is it Maggie who's doing the pictures? Anyway, if you can go to the image of the motel. Yeah, that's the one. Okay. There's it's almost a kind of quintessential Stephen Shore type picture from American Service, right? And you're actually in the book, and I like this, you actually go pretty light on this kind of Americana, because it's really easy after all that 70s work to kind of fall into a habit where it's all about signs. Or Friedlander is another example. It's all about signs. It's all about, roadway constructions. It's all about cars. Shore often, he said really famously, look, if you're going to take a picture of anything, put a car in it, Later on, this is going to be like the perfect reference for the period in which it was shot. And you go kind of light on that. And I appreciated that because it's like really low-hanging fruit. So I wonder, for a picture of like this, what were you thinking about? What struck you? Why did you want to take this picture? Or why did you want to include it? You probably took a lot of pictures, but I'm just...
I was just thinking you didn't see my contact sheets. Yes, I went more light on it because first and foremost, the people, the humans, were the focus of this body of work. I did need it. It was a necessity to include the environment as well, because we are shaped by the environment. But I didn't want to give it too much room. A place like this rundown seaside motel with a very interesting back story, which I don't dive into it now, is what I really like to focus on in the pictures I include, I take and include, are the many very tiny details. It is not just this stereotypically rundown motel. It is the bicycle covered up in front of it. It is that car with that surfboard,
Right.
and it's in particular, as we can see in the front of the car, there's two little flags mounted to the front of it, and it is the details that speak to me. And that's why also, in particular in the book, what I really enjoyed in working with my publisher, that we were able to actually print it in fairly large size, to be able to show the pictures larger and to give those details room. But yeah, so in these arrangements, it is what I like to include was the details, or that picture standing for something else. Giving me an example of something, or the audience an example of something else that I see in that country, in that society.
Yeah, it's funny. This particular picture, which I love, because of the surfboard, because of the flags, but also because it was taken in Myrtle Beach. And Myrtle Beach is sort of in one of those zones, like increasingly places in the United States that are becoming more and more environmentally vulnerable.
Yeah.
And I like to think, and again, not to push it too hard, but I like to think of a motel like this as being much more emblematic about something that's happening kind of in the wider world to the United States physically. And again, I don't want to push that too hard, but this really resonated as an image. Before we talk about, and I absolutely want to talk about the portraits and about the people you met, because like you say, that's the core of this project. I want to look at one more picture. And again, I appreciated this. I appreciated the fact that you did not do a lot of landscape photography, or did not choose a lot of landscape photos, only a few. And can we go to the picture of the river with the birds? I think it's a river, actually.
No, it's a flat. It's actually in Texas. It's a flat land.
Right.
Yeah, it's a flat land with the bird flood. Further down.
No, that's a perfect Joel Sternfeld right there, actually.
Here we go. Yeah.
And what I wanted to ask you about, it's a lovely picture. It's enormously well positioned in the sense that every time you arrive at a landscape like this, you focus on it, because it comes out of all the people pictures around it. So obviously there's a relationship you're trying to focus on. Can you tell me a little bit about your sense of the physical geography of the territory that you covered? Just sort of, what's America in terms of kind of physical spread?
First of all, as I mentioned, I traveled in other countries fairly extensively before, and I was blown away to be in such a huge country with this so different types of landscapes. I probably will never forget how I come from Kansas, the flatlands, going out west and see the Rockies for the first time in my life. Deserts, jungles, tons of forests, flatlands. I was drawn to them, and at the same time, I was amazed how so many different Americans, 320 million people, live across such a vastly different landscape, still united by the same culture, language, and political system. And then this is again, it is in close to Lubbock, just outside of town, Lubbock in Texas.
Right.
And there I remember the gentleman who drove me out there. And one of his quotes are in the book. He constantly talked in parables, usually using song lyrics, warning me about the country. Don't go there, don't go here, because in that song from the 70s, they talk about, don't go to El Paso because you're going to get shot by a woman with the name Susie or something like that. That was him. But we drove by there, and he pointed out that this flock of birds to me, and we actually stopped. And we stopped for the birds. him and me. And he stayed by the car, me going much closer, and I was amazed by the synchronicity of the flock of the birds flying up. And to some degree, I'm usually not so much in interpreting things. It's not my type, but to some degree, I was fascinated about how that reminded me about the answers people gave me in this country, across this country, especially when it comes to fear. So these birds go up because they're afraid I'm coming there. They all fly at the same time up. And if I notice something, and you know it because you know the book, it's one of the big topics in the book is fear, especially in the stories and the quotes. Mm-hmm. And it's a constant topic going through the book. And just to name one sentence people said to me across this country, it was, never trust Americans.
It's really fascinating. I mean, at the same time, they were enormously generous to you. They gave up their time. They gave up places to stay. And they also gave up a kind of trust, right? And how do you square that? Is it because they thought you were from another planet and they didn't have to worry about anything? Or is there, or was there, we'll get to the portraits in a minute, a kind of opposition between the way people thought about each other and maybe the way they actually were? I wonder if that kind of like discrepancy ever kind of got to you, or that you thought about that.
I think there's some big difference in what people believe to be true and what people do and how they act. Another often quoted sentence on the road was people stopping next to me, taking me into their car, into their house, telling me, if I don't do that, if I don't help you, nobody else in this country will, because they're gonna take rather away something from you than giving you something. And obviously, I told that person, well, I'm already 3 months on the road, so I didn't start here. So that was always quite interesting reaction from them. But yes, my foreignness has tremendously helped me in doing this in this project. People trusted me. I do think I have a very trusting nature in me, for my personality, for my character. It happens many times also in my, let's say, my private life, wherever, not just in the US, where people out of the blue invite me to their house or their place and tell me they don't usually do that. So I must have something in my aura. I'm very blessed in that regards. But lots of people did help me, stating very clear, it is you are here because you are not American. And just to show you to what extent I did across this country, in many cases, I shared beds with people. People just met, man and woman. Mm-hmm. I did that a very clear. Also, another rule was I have the clear no sex rule, and I was very clear in communicating that. But I shared beds with people, and people trusted me to that extent.
Yeah, it's remarkable. It's really remarkable. And it does make me, I don't know if nostalgic is the right word, but, talking about hitchhiking back in the 60s and 70s, which is when, that at least for people my generation that was a standard way to get around, even if you were going really vast distances. I mean, and that kind of trust it has evaporated so much, or it, like you say, people think it's utterly insane. So when I've talked to my students about this, I've had exactly the same experience you did, which is like they think it's utterly incomprehensible. It's like, what? You did what? And the erosion of that sense, or its replacement by the notion that every encounter is potentially dangerous
Mm.
First of all, it's not true. And second of all, the only thing I can figure is that it's been fed by a kind of media a madness where trust has been replaced by the kind of frisson of danger. And it just, and when you get out there, of course, you find something very different, very different. Anyway, can we go to some of the portraits? The people are really quite unusual. Your photographs are really kind of wonderful. Let's talk about her for a minute. And I wonder if you give us a little bit of the story behind her. Your description was so moving. And I wonder if you just talk a little bit about how you met her and who she was.
She's a great example for that. But let me add one sentence to what you just before that people don't seem to trust, but you still meet most likely trusting people out there and helping people. Is in my experience when explaining that project to other people, often it is not the fear itself that keeps people away from doing that. Beyond, even further or even stronger is the notion to enter the absolute unknown, which holds people back. Because to do a project like that or a journey like that, you step completely out of your comfort zone. Because we wake up in our normal lives, we wake up, we have our routines, we have our work, our exercises, our hobbies, and we know where we're gonna sleep that same night. And right. When you do that, you give all of that up. And that is, in my experience, in my conversations, what people are mostly afraid about. Where to put my head, who do I meet, what will happen, where will I sleep, will I find that place? And that unknown is what many people are afraid about.
And okay, not to go on too much about this, but the project is so resonant now, and perhaps always has been in the United States, because the problem of not knowing where you will put your head next is far more common in this country than we're willing to admit. And it's enormously resonant, I think, for the artist and for the photographer. I'm not going to overstate this, but to put yourself at that level of uncertainty, even if it's not going to happen to you, or it's not likely to happen to you, that you're not coming back. Nevertheless,
the amount of people who approach me on gas stations, on the roads, forcing upon me cash or food or something else with the message, I know what you're going through. I know how it feels like not to know where to go next or where to sleep. I want you to take this. It was unbelievable.
And really important for us to recognize this. I mean, we're in Brooklyn, or we're in a bubble, or we're in New York, we're kind of in a bubble, but we're not in a bubble. There are a lot of people on the move, a lot of people who face that uncertainty all the time, even if they are in a place. Anyway, let's talk a little bit about our friend here.
Okay, so this is, it's a great picture because it really, the picture and the story resonates with a lot of people. So in a nutshell, it's this Jill. I meet her on a Friday afternoon in South Carolina. And so what happened that day is that she went in the morning for work. She's an accountant, taking her suitcase with her secretly with some dresses inside. Her ex-husband, which she divorced but never moved out, at home, TV addicted, her adult kids, nobody talks at home with her. She is a breadwinner. She brings the money, the food. She cleans the house. She takes care about everything. And she feels completely alone and neglected. So she goes to work that day. And after work, with the suitcase in her car, she drives 400 miles. And that's where I meet her, on the road. She drives this 400 miles. It's Friday afternoon. I run into her. And she instantly invites me for lunch. We meet on the street talking. And I learn throughout this conversation, so not only the backstory, but also what her mission now is. And her mission, it reads like a Hollywood movie script. Her mission is, she said, I don't know how long I will be gone. I don't know if I will tell them where I am. For now, they don't know it, but I need two things out of this escape. I need to see the beach again, and I need to have sex the first time in 16 years.
Wow.
So I stuck with her for 3 days. Again, I had a very clear no sex rule, but I was on her side for about 3 days. And basically, to break it down now, it's a very interesting story, which is in the book. But this image is taken literally 5 minutes after she has gotten what she wanted. And she was in a complete state of trance, smoking a cigarette, listening to music in a nightgown, dancing on the street.
Wow.
And just to add one more layer to that, what I found very interesting, she repetitively said throughout this entire journey on her side, looking at me, the only reason you're here is you're not American. Why would a German come all the way from Europe to do something harmful to other people? So I can sleep with you in the same room. You can be with me all the time. I fully trust you.
Really fascinating. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
No, yes, just want to. It's also a great example, and with many, many more there are of really in a very short amount of time, very letting me sharing with me incredible private and personal stories of her past and or current and present situation, and that was from first day to the last day something I experienced and something Jacob Holt, the Dutch hitchhiker, talked extensively about. Is you as a hitchhiker, you are not just a documentarist, a photojournalist. You are a brother, father, counselor, pastor for these
Wow.
people, and these people share with you almost instantly their most private thoughts and experiences, often adding, "Nobody else knows that, but I need to let it go now."
Okay, can we look at one more picture that I wanted to ask you about? We could spend, the stories behind all the pictures are so moving. I wonder if we could look at the one of the young man dressed in red. It's just down a couple. Yeah, that one. I wonder if you'd tell us a little bit about him.
Yeah, so it's I just talked to him actually a few days ago. So with many people, I'm still in touch. Jay in New Orleans lives in a camper covered with 40,000 stickers. Actually, I don't know if that's still the case because he texted me a few days ago that he changed the camper. So I'm not sure if it's still the case. But when I met him, it was easy to recognize from far away. So he lives in his camper in New Orleans. He has an extensive collection of robes and jackets and sunglasses and other accessories in his camper. And basically, he's used to be a barber, quit his job, and what he now does is every night he has a mini golf, a golf cart, and he likes to drive downtown New Orleans with his golf cart, and people want to take pictures with him, talk to him because of his fancy clothing, and he's a very, very open personality. Very fascinating, and so I spent quite a couple of days with him. And also here again, often people's reality, how they live, what their state of mind is for all of us connected to what have you experienced in your past, in your childhood. And so he has this incredible dark chapter and how that ties into his mindset and state of living, and also especially his political point of views. He spent an excessive amount of time in he's very, very much against Trump and his politics, and he took a lot of time explaining to me why he is so opposed to his politics and why he has no understanding for a man like him.
It raises another question. One of the things that comes up, and I know I just got to know from Chloe that there's a lot of people with questions, and I think those are going to be really, really interesting on the chat. A lot of pictures of people with guns, with gun tattoos, with rifles, with pistols on their Let's take a look at the one of the guy sitting in his truck, I think. Where is he? Yeah, there he is.
21.
Yeah, 21. Yeah. And, you know, I'm wondering, let's talk a little bit about that idea of the gun and sort of, I don't know, I don't want to talk about violence, but just the gun as something that people need. And how you experience that.
Actually, funny that you say it's many pictures with guns, because something I often hear is from people who know the project but have not looked into it yet, say, well, they're surprised that it's so few guns in the book. So, I don't know. Maybe it's non-American. They think every second picture should have a gun. I don't know. But there are a few guns, and there are people with tattoos of guns. And this guy, Nathan in Florida, and he literally picked me up with telling me, "Don't make any shit. I have a pistol in my pocket, another one in the glove box, an AK-47, and a shotgun in the back seat." And he was very serious about it.
Yeah.
The thing is, before I go into what you just asked me, the thing is, and that's the case for every single encounter, is you have to make, if you do something like this, you have a split of a second, like less than 1 second, looking in that person's eyes to make a consciousness decision. Is that safe now? Either the vehicle I'm going with, or people taking me somewhere, or into their house or somewhere else, especially if it's very isolated. I had people picking me up in the deep countryside in a forest, taking me to their cabin, like far away from any neighbor. And then it's this conscious decision: can I trust that person? You need to read that person. So in this case, I looked at him and I figured, well, he spoke out a warning. He is obviously equipped with everything he told me, but I figured I can trust him. I did run in a few tricky situations across this country. Obviously, I'm still here, so I didn't I did not get shots. It did open up, I have to admit, it did open up for me as a European, as a German who is at all not familiar with that topic. It did open up in some ways an understanding why some people are armed. To give you an example, I stayed with one gentleman. He's actually in the book, in the slideshow as well. It's the guy with the tattoo. Kevin, maybe we can.
With a gun tattoo on his side, right?
Yes, they're up there, 17. So this guy is staying in California, very in the middle of nowhere, basically, and with his daughter and wife. And first of all, he's in a very tricky business. He's a marijuana farmer. It's legal, but as I quickly learned from him and his friends, all of them, they have two types of business. One is legal, the other one is not on the record, let's put it this way. So they're already dealing with in a very tricky area. But on top of that, to reach his house from the next city with a police station, it takes, according to him, it takes 45 minutes to be at this place. So the way he explained it to me is, in 45 minutes, everything is over. So I need to be capable of defending myself in that business, living in that area. Okay, that's maybe an extreme example. Most people don't live like this. And most people, even with guns I stayed with, live in cities, usually even in very nice neighborhoods. So there is, I think, from my understanding, from what I understood and learned, and I often spoke, especially with people with guns, I spoke about their relation to the guns. To my understanding, it is very much based on, is it Third Amendment? Correct me if I'm wrong. Yes. Second, on the Second Amendment, of the possibility to defend yourself against your own government if that is necessary. Something again in Europe, I live in Norway and in Germany, we are very unfamiliar with. Even though Norway has a very high rate of private guns, but that is exclusively reserved for hunting, and the guns used there are for hunting. That's not the case in the US for most cases. So it was interesting for me to see and observe that. And it's hard for me to judge it, not in a way of not knowing, okay, what is the actual situation in their neighborhood and where they're living? Is it actually necessary? From my observation, in many cases, no. But I'm also not living there.
Mm-hmm. Right. And, you know, one of the things that I thought was so fascinating, regardless of what our judgments, and there have been a number of photographers who have done remarkable studies about the presence of guns in our society. They've been really astonishing, I think, projects. Is that if you think about Robert Frank, about the Americans, he had a few themes, and we won't be able to get to everything that's in your book. We won't probably have time to talk about religion, for example, which I think was enormously important. But one of the things that comes up in Frank over and over again is, of course, the flag and how that works and how people use it and what they think about it and where it appears. And I kind of felt that the gun was a little bit like that in your book, even though, again, it doesn't show up in every image. It's not so much of a motif as it is in Frank. It does have that kind of presence. And I do think it's one of those things that, let's call it the Second Amendment fascination. It's almost like a mirror. It's like a strange mirror that reflects different aspects of what people think based on where the gun is in their life. Anyway, I know we have, and Chloe, you can check me on this, but is it time for us to go to the chat and take some questions from the field?
Yeah, we can take some questions.
Or should we?
So Magley has
Yeah.
posted a link in the chat for folks to submit their questions. I have a question I can start us off with.
Sure.
Victor, I'm curious about the ethics of the project in terms of, you know, people sharing really personal pieces of information with you. And I'm curious how you navigated that ethically, and how you've decided what to share and what to keep private. But then also, I think I'm also curious about assumptions and how you navigated certain assumptions that you might have coming into an environment, and you know how that worked as a project, and as a daily practice on the road.
Let me answer the second one first. The person has to be born yet without assumptions. So obviously, being on the roads, I, to some degree, even survived making assumptions. And just to give you an example, I mentioned earlier, I need at a split of a second to find out if I can trust that person. That goes the opposite way as well. People had at a very short window to explain to people what I'm doing and to communicate that they can trust me. And to do so, I was in a situation where I often had to tailor my introduction to people. And to give you an example, if I assumed, now we're talking about assumption, if I assumed that person I was about to approach as an academic, I would introduce myself as a foreign student in Rhode Island on a Fulbright scholarship. So that often opened doors right away. If I assumed that person as a Christian, I would introduce myself as a Christian, and in often adding, I'm a PK, a preacher's kid. That backfired also a few times. Then, if I assumed that person would live perhaps on the roads or is homeless, I did spend a fair amount of time with people in that situation as well. I would introduce myself as someone who is currently on the road as well, and with no place to sleep at that night. Yes, so where assumptions are involved, however, many times I was surprised. I was surprised by, especially when getting to know people better, surprised about how they actually think and how they live. Often, not always, but often I figured out that my assumptions were wrong. And I had to correct them along the way. The ethics. So just to explain to you the process a bit better in that regards, I would never introduce that project right away to the people. I would, as I said, I would introduce myself perhaps as a foreign student trying to understand America or Americans, and I would tell them I study photography and I would like to take some pictures. And as we then, often I would spend up to a week with some people. And as the time went on and we dived into very intimate personal topics, at some point, usually towards the end, we have already covered a couple of themes. I would then introduce to them, okay, listen, this is what I'm doing here. I'm actually collecting informations. I want to get to know you and I would like to include you in the book. And for that, I need to actually make a formal interview with you. So we have talked about a few things, but I haven't written them down. I don't have them on tape, anything, and I would like to use it. Are you up for that? And many, I think, as far as I remember, there were maybe 2 or 3 people who said no. And other people who were concerned about their privacy then asked, still give me the permission. We would sit down and make that interview and would then ask me to change their names or their location, usually both. And that obviously I did afterwards. So I would not leave that place without having thoroughly talked with them about what I'm doing and to get the permission usually on tape. Obviously, so some people have raised, and it's a good point, a valid point, some people have raised then the point, okay, well, you have, by spending so much time with them, they have lent you a lot of trust, which they did. And why did you not introduce right away what you're doing? It's a valid point, because my assumption was, if I would have done that, there are 2 possible outcomes. Either people would have said straight away, no, not with me, I don't know you. And if they would have said yes, then my assumption was people would tailor their behavior and their answers in the topics, especially politics, about what they think I want to hear.
Right.
And that I wanted to avoid that under any circumstance.
I've got another question for you, Victor.
Yeah.
I've got a few others. I've got one from Ellen in the audience. Ellen asks, do Americans still hitchhike in Germany? What is the reception of German people with Americans? Is it the same as your experience here in the US?
No, so first, there is significant less hitchhiking in Germany compared to 20, 30 years ago as well. But there is a fair amount of hitchhiking. And from what I hear and have experienced myself, people have considered, especially Germany, as a hitchhiking paradise. It is usually much safer. Or there's nobody with a gun out there. And from what I've heard from other Americans hitchhiking, they consider it as fairly easy to do so. However, I question if it's that easy to get into people's houses in Germany. We are very reserved.
Okay, next question is Anonymous,
Mhm.
what did you feel was a common thread you found in the people that you met on this journey?
Politics,
Mm.
definitely. Um, Often it was with one foot inside of the car. I was not, people started to educate me already, or in people's houses or in groups. It was definitely politics. So I mentioned at the very beginning, people talking about we are living in controversial times. And that was like a red thread throughout the journey and throughout the book as well. People perceiving me as a foreigner, as I am, and instantly wanting to educate me of what is really going on politically in this country. And that was the case for Democrats and Republicans without exception. And they would do that often very extensively. So I would sometimes not even need to talk for 2 hours about people nonstop trying to educate me, and usually paired obviously with their personal point of views and very much in support of one party. There's very few to none people out there who took me in and hosted me and then found out they were maybe a third party or some a smaller party, or were trying to understand both sides. It was very one sided in 99% of the cases.
Thank you, Victor. Holly in the audience notices that the map of your hitchhiking shows that you traveled through several regions with indigenous reservations. What was that experience like? Did you speak with anyone on the reservations?
Yes, there are actually, I think, two pictures included in the slideshow from a reservation. Yes, I've been in a couple of reservations. It was first and foremost, I would say it was very helpful not to be American in these reservations. I perceived it that way. People were incredibly open. People hosted me, very curious to learn about me and my past, and again, very, very open to show me how the reality of living on that reservation is today. And in most cases, it was, I have to say, quite sad. What I've discovered and seen, and people showed me. Again, very heartwarming people, very open, but drugs, alcohol, and other issues were very prevalent in those reservations. Mm. As well as, but that's not only in the case of the reservations, that was also in outside of them, a lot of physical violence. So but that is part of the book as well, in the case, and not just on the reservations. I observed that in many different other parts of the US and included it in the book.
Thank you, everyone in the audience, for your questions today. I think that's going to conclude Q&A unless you have anything else you want to ask, Lyle.
Yeah, actually, I have a couple of things. Because this was it was a political period, right? You started before the election, the first Trump election. Is that right?
No. It was fairly shortly after he got into office.
Okay, and obviously that would condition kind of one sense of just not just the mood, but the whole kind of mental environment of the country. Did you find, as you said, that politics was very important? Did you sense that sort of the kind of animosity between sides that we really now very much feel today? I mean, obviously, that was mobilized during the first campaign in 2016. There was a lot of pretty ugly stuff that was starting to come out. I wonder if you felt, we talked about fear and we talked about obviously people being on one side or another. Did you feel that kind of opposition was complete?
Many people telling me just to give you an example, many people telling me they are not capable of talking to their brothers, sisters, parents, best friends, other family members anymore. People they have known for all their life, not capable of sitting in the same room and the same table anymore. Often accompanied with, at least they claim, trying to find coping mechanisms with that and solutions, for instance, of, okay, making agreements if we meet or talk on the phone. We will not talk about politics anymore. In many cases, people say it didn't work, and they literally had to cut their relationship with these formerly beloved people, and probably still beloved people. Yeah, that was something which I've heard many times, and is also represented in the book through many of the quotes in particular. It is, in my experience, a disbelief that the other side is not on the extreme side. It is instantly the assumption that the other side must be on the very far extreme, and that there's no common ground anymore. And love is not enough to build a bridge to that over that common ground, and that was very sad to hear in many cases. And that goes, in my experience, that goes for both sides. I've heard that from both sides, from many different cases.
Yeah. And just as a German, and thinking about Europe and thinking about Germany over the last sort of 5-6 years, do you feel that that's become more of a norm in Europe, that inability to see, or let's not say see, let's say communicate at all with others?
I can't talk for Europe. I can only talk for Germany in that regard. As a German living in Germany, used to live in Germany, but still very frequently there and having family there, we are heading in a similar direction. Yes, I would say so. From my observation, we are heading in a similar direction. We are not there yet, but we also experience, I don't know if you have noticed it, I think one day after the US election, the German Chancellor announced that the coalition it's most likely falling apart, and we have an early election in March. And there is definitely for years now a tension of going into the extremes on both sides, and not being able to understand the other side, but also not being able to communicate with the other side anymore. I haven't heard yet about people where families have broken apart because of that. But if that continues, we will see the same. And that's at least my prediction in that regard.
Okay, just one final question.
Please.
I kind of, can I put this? I don't want to end on a down note, okay, at all. So I'd really like to get your sense, as you step back from this, your sense about what the country meant to you, or what it means to you, kind of as a place or as an experience or as a set of human beings that you met. How's it changed you as a person? I mean, I know that's kind of a vague and big question, but I'm really interested in that.
I mean, obviously doing this on off for 2 years, it was a major, maybe the biggest part in my life for 2 years. And it was, by the nature of the project, an incredible adventure, being out there and exposed to these raw experiences. I mentioned I had a hitchhiking experience before, but I had to learn in a new way to be guided by my gut feeling and to learn who I can trust along the road. I learned a lot about myself in terms of reading myself, in reading how I perceive my environment and the people I'm talking to in front of me. It's definitely confirmed my faith and the mission I had out there. I literally considered myself from day one as someone, it is my mission to do it. So I was able to bear very, very uncomfortable situations out there. Literally, like to give you one example, to sleep in very rare cases, but to sleep in public restrooms on the floor, public toilets, because this was the only place I could find for that night, or very uncomfortable people around. The reason I was able to go through that is because I learned to see that as a mission. I'm out there for these people, to learn about this country, to learn about myself, and to create an historical document. So that's the way I look at this project. This is an historical document. When you want to know what was the Trump era and the first Trump era, this is a piece of document you can look at to understand that. So I grew a lot. I grew a lot during this time as in my personality, in my character, to become steadfast, to be focused, and to test my limits as well. Also, so how far can I go? How far can I go in reading people and understanding? How far I can go in trusting people in particular? And it helped me. It still helps me and serves me a lot to this day to have accomplished it, to have done this. And on top of that, it's something I'm very happy, very proud about, is something I already experienced on the road, but even more afterwards, is talking to Americans in this day and age. Many Americans who are incredibly sad of what is happening, and see their country going down, basically. And when I then talk about this body of work, and oh yes, there's a lot of fear inside of the book. There's violence, there's guns and drugs and all of that. But essentially, to end here on a positive note, on a good note, is when I was on the road and people stopped for me saying, if I stop for you, as I mentioned earlier, because nobody else is going to do that. And I told them, listen, I'm already 3 months on the road. Tons of people have given me rides and hosted me. The general reaction from Americans was, if that is true, there are more good people out here than we seem to understand or to see. And that is still the same effect. Now, the book is out for 2 years. If I talk to people about it, Americans in particular, and I told them that what I did for this research, often at first it's disbelief, and then the disbelief turns into amazement, and okay, then the consequence is, okay, we are better off perhaps than we are aware about, if there are so many good people out there who are that generous in helping someone they have never met before. And that goes across political spectrum.
Great. Thank you, Victor. I really appreciate it. We had talked about doing a reading, Chloe. Victor, yes. Did you have passages you wanted? A couple of things that you chose I thought were really they were very revealing about your own motivations and inspirations. I would. You have time, Chloe, to do that? Or where are we at?
Yeah, we can do that.
We have time. Perfect. Great. Yes, I have 2 passages I would love to read, and they are from Steinbeck, John Steinbeck, one of his books, Travels with Charlie in Search of America. I had it in my backpack on the first, when I first started that research, and it really enlightened me and shaped my perception of what I'm actually doing. So I'm gonna read them now. It would be pleasant to be able to say of my travels with Charlie, I went out to find the truth about my country and I found it. And then it would be such a simple matter to set down my findings and lean back comfortable with a fine sense of having discovered truths and taught them to my readers. I wish it were that easy. But what I carried in my head and deeper in my perceptions was a barrel of worms. I discovered long ago in collecting and classifying marine animals that what I found was closely intermeshed with how I felt at that moment. External reality has a way of being not so external after all. This monster of a land, this mightiest of nations, the spawn of the future, turns out to be the macrocosm of microcosm, me. If an Englishman or a Frenchman or an Italian should travel my route, see what I saw, hear what I heard, their stored pictures would be not only different from mine, but equally different from one another. If other American readers find this account should feel true, that agreement would only mean that we are alike out of Americanness. And the second passage, same book. On the long journey, doubts were often my companions. I've always admired those reporters who can descend on an area, talk to key people, ask key questions, take samplings of opinions, and then set down an orderly report, very like a roadmap. I envy this technique and at the same time do not trust it as a mirror of reality. I feel that there are too many realities. What I set down here is true until someone else passes that way and rearranges the world in his own style. In literary criticism, the critic has no choice but to make over the victim of his attention into something the size and shape of himself. And in this report, I do not fool myself into thinking I am dealing with Constance. A long time ago, I was in the ancient city of Prague, and at the same time, Joseph Alsop, the justly famous critic of places and events, was there. He talked to informed people, officials, ambassadors. He read reports, even the fine print and figures, while I, in my slipshod manner, roved about with the actors, gypsies, and vagabonds. Joe and I flew home to America on the same plane, and on the way he told me about Prague, and his Prague had no relation to the city I had seen and heard. I just wasn't the same place, and yet each of us was honest, neither one a liar, both pretty good observer by any standard, and we brought home two cities, two truths. For this reason, I cannot command this account as an America that you will find. So much there is to see, but our morning eyes describe a different world than do our afternoon eyes. And surely our varied evening eyes can report only a very evening world. Thank you.
Thank you, Victor. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lyle. This was a pleasure talking to you. Thank you to the Rail, Brooklyn Rail. It was a pleasure being online here. I really enjoyed it, and really thank you for your support and the opportunity to talk about my work here. And if any of the listeners, if you happen to be in Paris, you should come to the Paris Photo tomorrow, 4 o'clock. I have a book signing here.
Yeah, it's a wonderful book. So if you can't be in Paris, buy it online. It's called The Americans I Met.
Thank you very much.
Thank you both. And if you're free on Monday, we'll be offering a screening of a conversation between our publisher and artistic director, Fong H. Bui, and the artist Genesis Tremaine on the occasion of Tremaine's exhibition in Paris, Sweet Jesus, at Almin Reich. So I do encourage you to watch that conversation. And as is Rail tradition, you all can now turn on your microphones and say hello and goodbye as you leave. Thank you so much for joining today.
Thank you so much. This was a great conversation. Thank you.
Thanks
Thanks
so
to
much.
Thank you.